Beginning with Aspasia. She was born sometime between 470 and 460 BC to an educated and therefore probably wealthy family in Miletus. She later migrated to Athens to become a hetairai, a high-class paid companion or educated prostitute of the mind as well as the body. Aspasia was a woman of great intellect. Her intellect spread throughout Athens, influencing many men and women throughout her time there. She was also apparently very hot. Her intellect led to the rhetoric of Athens as well as Pericles himself, reaching to the overall influence of the whole city as well as the leaders of it. Aspasia and Pericles were in love, or so people say, until Pericles died. She later moved on to his companion Lysicles, who also later died in a war. No one knows what happens to Aspasia after this, but she probably died. Pericles. Pericles was born in Athens in 495 BC to a noble, wealthy family with an inclination towards education and knowledge. Pericles became very involved in politics, especially in the 60s. This later grew his influence and allowed him to seize power in Athens. Two events that led to this was that Pericles ostracized his rival from Athens, but his mentor, Ephialtes, was assassinated not long after. These two events sparked Pericles' rise to power. Pericles, as commander-in-chief, led the Athenians in the First Peloponnesian War in multiple battles, until a truce was eventually reached which allowed him to focus on other areas of his life. Most likely Pericles' most influential and historical speech was his funeral oration. In Pericles' funeral oration, he praises the fallen troops, the bravery of Athenian ancestors, and the families who sacrificed loved ones, and to honor the memory of the fallen. The Athenian people loved this, and his influence only grew. But war struck yet again in the Second Peloponnesian War. Not long after the beginning of the Second Peloponnesian War, plague struck Athens. Athens was plunged into intellectual, cultural, and spiritual darkness. Millions died, including eventually Pericles himself.
Next in rhetorical history is the classical period, whose main figures were Gorgias, Plato, and Aristotle. In 485 BC, the largest topic in rhetoric was whether or not truth actually existed, whether intrinsic spiritual forms were real or not. Gorgias thought that we cannot know absolute truths of anything, and that it is more important to focus on the practical rather than pursue the unknown. For Gorgias, rhetoric was the art of speaking and was viewed as a tool, even a weapon. Sophistic rhetoric held emphasis on the emotional appeal, style, and delivery of speech. His encomium is a piece in which he defends Helen of Troy for causing a 10-year war. The point is not actually to prove that Helen is justified, but to show that words have the potential to remove blame by arguing from different sides of a subject. That is what he taught his students to do. In order to be named proficient at rhetoric, they must argue both sides of an issue successfully. Plato is the most famous philosopher of all time. His most central belief is that there are two worlds, the real world and the world of forms, after which the real world is an imitation. Life, he believed, is a struggle to remember these objective truths of the forms by a logical process called dialectic. Rhetoric for Plato was not especially helpful in reaching objective truth, and therefore is not worth exploring. For these reasons, Plato was opposed to the sophist, and preferred that one pursue philosophy rather than politics or speech-giving. Aristotle was Plato's student, but he eventually came to believe that Plato's ideas were not practical for real life. Objective truths probably existed for Aristotle, but pursuing them instead of the real world was not helpful to progressing in life. Rhetoric was an essential art to him that could be broken down into a structure and taught. It is from Aristotle that we get ethos, pathos, and logos, as well as the 28 topoi.
Next, we have the late Republic, whose largest rhetorical figure is Cicero. Cicero was born in 106 BC in a small hill town southeast of Rome called Arpino. Because his legs were crippled in an accident at an early age, he was unable to enter public life, so he studied extensively to compensate for it. He educated himself in the teachings of ancient Greek philosophers, poets, and historians. Cicero started a political career as a lawyer around 82 BC, and eventually graduated to an office position as one of 20 annual quaestor, which is basically a trainee for serious public administration. In 63 BC, Cicero was elected as consul. During his consulship, he executed 4 people without trial. This is significant because in 58 BC, a man named Publius Clodius Pulcher passed a new law that anyone who executed someone without a proper trial was to be exiled. So, Cicero was sent into exile and his house was confiscated by the state. A little over a year later, Cicero returns to Italy and is greeted by cheering crowds. He attempted to re-enter politics, but ended up focusing on literary works instead. So, Cicero doesn't really have a rhetorical theory, so this is where most of it comes in. In his literary work, Cicero talks about the qualities of a good orator. He says that any good orator must be well educated in all areas of knowledge. But not only should the orator be educated but experienced, because orators should not learn from reading things simply out of books, but experiencing them as well. It's through experience that a person gains knowledge of all 5 senses of that particular idea, say, running. This is what makes a great orator, because when an orator is conveying that idea to an audience, he must be able to perfectly describe it in order that the crowd knows exactly what he is talking about. These are the qualities of a good orator according to Cicero.
Marcus Fabius Quintilianus was born in 35 AD in Calahorra of northern Spain. His father, a well-educated orator, sent him to Rome to study under Domitius Afer, a leading orator of the day who may have instilled in him his love of Cicero. Having done this, he practiced law for a bit, and then went on to start the very first state-subsidized rhetoric school in 69 AD. He continued teaching at his school until 88 AD, when he was tasked with educating the Emperor Domitian's 2 heirs, given the consular rank by their father. Unfortunately, not much else about his personal life away from the public is known, including even the date of his death. His magnum opus, the Institutio Oratoria, was written concerning the education of a perfect orator from the beginning of his life to what they could do for society when completely studied. It begins, he says, from infancy. Even at a young age, people begin to form habits, so the nurse of the child must be well studied, and they should play with letter blocks that they might better learn language. Furthermore, they must be surrounded by educated people. Both the father and the mother should be educated, which was unprecedented at the time, and even his slave should be smart enough to correct his grammatical errors. He should also have a model orator to look up to and imitate. For example, Quintilian says, Cicero. Now recall, Quintilian was fascinated by Cicero, and not just as a model orator. Quintilian's second most important idea concerning education was that orators must be morally upright. This sounds suspiciously like Cicero's ideas that good orators could overcome the greedy and corrupt government in his time. Quintilian points out that being an orator is about carrying conviction, and since people won't trust or easily believe someone that they see to be immoral, bad people naturally cannot be rhetors.